Hey guys, welcome back. Today we've got a story out of Utah that at first sounds like local political drama, but the deeper you look, the more it opens up a much bigger conversation about trust in institutions, judicial independence, and how fragile public confidence can become in America right now. So here's the headline. Utah Supreme Court Justice Diana Hagan has resigned after weeks of controversy surrounding allegations that she had an inappropriate personal relationship with an attorney involved in a major redistricting case before the court. Now, officially, investigators said there was insufficient evidence of judicial misconduct. Hagan denied any unethical behavior. The attorney involved also denied wrongdoing. But the political pressure kept building. The media attention intensified, and eventually Hagan stepped down, saying she wanted to protect her family and avoid further damage to the judiciary. And honestly, this story is fascinating because it touches three explosive things in modern America all at once: courts, elections, and political polarization. Let's unpack this. The core issue revolves around redistricting. That's the process where states redraw congressional maps after the census. And if you've followed American politics at all over the past decade, you already know redistricting has become political warfare with legal paperwork. Both Republicans and Democrats fight brutally over these maps because congressional boundaries can basically decide who controls Congress, sometimes before a single vote is even cast. In Utah, Republicans had drawn a congressional map that heavily favored the GOP. A lawsuit challenged that map, arguing it unfairly diluted certain voters. Justice Hagan participated in decisions tied to that broader battle before later recusing herself from cases involving attorney David Raymond, the lawyer at the center of the allegations. Now, here's where things get politically radioactive. The allegations didn't come from investigative reporters or political opponents initially. They reportedly came from Hagan's ex-husband during a painful divorce process. According to reports, he alleged there were flirtatious text messages and an improper relationship. Investigators reviewed the claims, but ultimately dismissed the misconduct complaint. But dismissal didn't end the story. Utah's Republican leadership, including Governor Spencer Cox and legislative leaders, still pushed for an independent investigation, arguing the public deserved transparency because the case involved election maps and the integrity of the court system. And this is where the story stops being just about one judge. Because what we're really watching here is the collapse of institutional trust across America. Think about it. 20 years ago, a judicial ethics review dismissing allegations might have ended the controversy. Today, half the country assumes institutions are protecting insiders, while the other half assumes investigations themselves are politically weaponized. Nobody trusts the referee anymore. That's the bigger crisis. And courts are increasingly trapped in the middle of it. The American judiciary used to operate with this aura of distance and neutrality. Judges were supposed to feel almost invisible, quiet figures interpreting law above politics. But now, judges are celebrities, targets, villains, heroes, fundraising tools. You can actually trace part of this transformation back to Bush v. Gore in 2000. Then came the Obamacare rulings, then Roe v. Wade being overturned. Then election lawsuits after 2020. Suddenly, courts weren't just interpreting politics, they were determining the political future itself. And once courts become political battlegrounds, judges themselves become political actors in the public imagination, whether they want that or not. That's why this Utah story matters nationally, because even if no formal misconduct occurred, perception alone became enough to destabilize confidence. And perception is everything in judicial legitimacy. A judge doesn't command an army. Courts don't have tanks. Their power depends entirely on whether the public believes the system is fair. That's it. Once people stop believing that, institutions start wobbling. What's especially interesting here is how personal relationships collided with America's hyper-polarized election environment. According to reports, Hagan said Raymond was a longtime friend. She also said she recused herself once concerns arose. But in modern politics, even the appearance of overlap can become explosive, especially when election maps are involved. And remember, redistricting cases aren't ordinary legal disputes anymore. These are effectively power struggles over democracy itself. Who gets represented? Which party gains seats? Whose votes matter more? These questions now carry almost existential emotional weight for both sides. That means anyone connected to these cases is automatically pulled into the national culture war machine. And honestly, social media makes all of this even worse, because once allegations hit the internet, nuance disappears instantly. People stop distinguishing between investigated, accused, proved, dismissed, or improper appearance. It all collapses into one giant cloud of suspicion and outrage. And political actors know that. You can already see how different media ecosystems framed this story completely differently. Conservative outlets emphasized ethics concerns surrounding a judge tied to a redistricting ruling. Other outlets focused more on privacy issues, institutional independence, and whether political leaders were overreaching into judicial affairs. Same facts, totally different narrative universes. That's modern America in a nutshell. Now, stepping back even further, there's also a deeper historical pattern here. Throughout history, courts become especially vulnerable during periods of democratic stress. You saw this in parts of Latin America during political polarization. You saw it in Eastern Europe. You even saw traces of it during earlier periods of American history when courts became entangled in fights over slavery, segregation, or executive power. When politics becomes existential, neutrality becomes almost impossible to maintain in the public eye. And judges become symbols, whether they choose to or not. That's why Hagan's resignation is probably less about one specific allegation and more about the unbearable pressure surrounding public institutions today. Her resignation letter hinted at exactly that, saying the scrutiny was affecting her family and the effective functioning of the judiciary. And honestly, that line may be the most important part of the whole story. Because America is entering an era where public service itself is becoming harder to sustain, judges, election workers, prosecutors, even local officials increasingly face nonstop political attacks, online harassment, media scrutiny, and personal exposure. The cost of staying in public life keeps rising. And when experienced officials decide it's no longer worth it, institutions weaken further. So this Utah case may seem small compared to the giant national headlines we usually talk about. But in some ways, it's a perfect microcosm of where America is heading. Polarized politics, election legitimacy fights, distrust of institutions, media fragmentation, personal scandal merging with constitutional conflict, all wrapped into one state Supreme Court resignation. And the uncomfortable question is this: can democratic institutions survive long-term when every decision, every relationship, and every controversy immediately becomes partisan ammunition? That's the real story here. All right, guys, that's it for today. If you enjoyed this breakdown, stick around because there are a lot more stories like this bubbling underneath the surface of American politics right now. And honestly, these quieter institutional stories may matter more than the loud campaign headlines everybody focuses on. See you next time.